My ex-father-in-law thought he could manipulate an entire church congregation against me and my sons. He painted himself as the grieving grandfather, cast us as the villains, and even sent a group of churchmen to publicly humiliate my 15-year-old son at our local farmer's market. But here's what he didn't know. I had evidence that would shatter his perfect Christian facade and expose the twisted lies he'd been spreading. What happened next didn't just get him kicked out of church. It destroyed his reputation in the one place that mattered most to him. If you've ever watched someone's lies crumble around them in the most poetic way possible, smash that subscribe button. Hit like on this video because you're about to witness justice served ice cold in the house of God. This is a story where the truth doesn't just set you free, it obliterates your enemies. Let's dive in. I'm 46 years old, a single father of 2 teenage sons, 17 and 15, and until last year, I thought I knew what my life looked like. I was married to a woman I'd loved for over 20 years. We had a comfortable routine, and despite some rough patches, I believed we were building something together. Then my world exploded in the most devastating way possible. My sons discovered their mother's affair. Not me, them. Imagine being a teenager and stumbling across evidence that your mom, the woman you're supposed to look up to, has been living a double life. They found messages, photos, proof that she'd been cheating with another man for years. And it wasn't just an affair. She was pregnant. Twice. My wife had 2 children with her lover while coming home to us every night, playing the role of devoted mother and wife. The betrayal cut deeper than I can describe. 20 years of marriage, and she'd been building a second family behind our backs. But what happened next made everything infinitely worse. When I confronted her, when I filed for divorce, my in-laws, her parents, aged 78 and 80, didn't just support their daughter. They actively encouraged her. I found messages between them where they told her I was too controlling and that she deserved to be happy. They knew about the children. They knew about the affair, and they supported it. Then fate intervened in the cruelest way. My wife died in an accident before our divorce could be finalized. Her lover died too, leaving behind 2 small children, the evidence of her betrayal, orphaned and alone. In a single moment, what had been a bitter divorce became something far more complex and painful. You'd think death might bring some peace, some closure. Instead, it unleashed hell. My former in-laws, who had encouraged their daughter's affair, who had helped her lie to me for years, suddenly transformed into grieving grandparents demanding custody of my sons. They wanted to move in with us. They wanted control over our lives. They wanted to erase the boundaries I'd fought to establish and force my traumatized teenagers to play happy family with the children who represented their mother's ultimate betrayal. Let me be clear about something. My sons are in therapy, discovering your mother's double life, learning that she created another family while lying to your face every day. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear. They're working through complex emotions about their half-siblings, children who are innocent, but who represent the destruction of everything they thought was true about their family. It's not hatred. It's hurt so deep it's become protective numbness. But my in-laws couldn't understand that. Or maybe they just didn't care. They inherited my wife's personal bank account and her life insurance money, so they weren't destitute like they'd later claim. But they wanted more. They wanted control. They wanted my sons to just get over their trauma and embrace the role of big brothers to children who embodied their mother's lies. When I refused, when I prioritized my sons' mental health over their demands, they declared war. The attack came on what should have been a beautiful day. It was my youngest son's birthday weekend, and I'd decided to do something special. We have this wonderful farmer's market in our town. Fresh produce, local vendors, artisanal goods. It's the kind of place where community happens, where neighbors chat over organic vegetables and children run between stalls with sticky fingers from fresh pastries. I gave my 15-year-old a budget and told him to go wild. It was his birthday celebration after all. He loves artisan jerky, craft sodas, and local honey, and I wanted him to feel spoiled and free. For an hour, I watched him bounce between stalls, carefully considering each purchase, his face lighting up with genuine joy for the first time in months. Then my phone rang. "Dad?" His voice was small, shaking. Nothing like the confident teenager who'd been debating between different flavors of homemade beef jerky minutes earlier. "Dad, I need you. There are these men, and they won't leave me alone, and I'm scared." The panic that shot through me was primal. I grabbed my older son and we ran through the market, pushing past families and vendors, following the sound of raised voices. What I found made my blood boil. 6 men, all in their 50s and 60s, had formed a circle around my son. Not a friendly circle, a trap. He was pressed against a vendor's table, clutching his bag of carefully chosen birthday treats while these men towered over him, their voices harsh and condemning. "You're being selfish and unchristian," one was saying, his finger pointed at my child's face. "Those poor orphaned children need their big brother, and you're too proud to do your Christian duty." Another voice cut in. "Your grandparents are heartbroken. They've lost their daughter, and now their grandsons won't even speak to them. Where's your compassion? You need to learn respect for your elders," said a third man, the one I recognized from my former in-laws' church. A good Christian boy would put family first. My 15-year-old son, still holding his birthday jerky and sodas, was trying not to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet struggle of someone who's been cornered and doesn't understand why the world has turned cruel. He kept saying, "I don't know you. Please leave me alone. I want my dad." The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just confrontation. It was coordinated harassment. These men had sought out my child, surrounded him in public, and were berating him for trauma responses that any therapist would tell you were completely normal. They were attacking a 15-year-old boy for not being able to magically heal from discovering his mother's betrayal and death. I pushed through their circle and put myself between them and my son. "Get away from him, now." The man I recognized, Robert from the church, had the audacity to smile at me. "We're just trying to help this family heal. Your son needs to understand his Christian obligations." "My son," I said, my voice deadly calm, "is 15 years old, has been through trauma you can't imagine, and you have no right to speak to him about anything." I sent my older son to pay for his brother's purchases and get to the car. Then I turned back to these self-appointed moral authorities. "You want to talk about Christian obligations?" I asked. "Let's talk about how you're harassing a child. Let's talk about how you've ambushed a teenager at a public market to bully him about family dynamics you know nothing about." That's when they showed their true colors. Robert stepped closer, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "We know everything we need to know. Your father-in-law has told us how you're keeping those precious children from their family, how you're raising your sons to be selfish and vindictive. You're not acting like a good Christian father should." A good Christian father? The words tasted like poison. "You mean I should be obedient to people who supported my wife's affair?" The silence that followed was telling. These men exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for that response. But Robert recovered quickly. "That's not what happened," he said firmly. "Your father-in-law explained everything. The other man was a sperm donor because you couldn't have more children. You rejected those innocent babies because they were girls, not boys." The lies were so outrageous, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. A sperm donor? Rejecting children because of their gender? My ex-father-in-law hadn't just twisted the truth. He'd created an entirely fictional narrative that painted his daughter as a loving mother, trying to expand her family and me as a bitter man who'd turned against innocent children. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I finally managed. "We know enough," another man said. "We know you're not honoring your in-laws, you're not providing Christian guidance to your sons, and you're standing in the way of family healing." The argument escalated. These men, emboldened by their righteous mission, grew louder and more accusatory. They called me selfish, unchristian, a bad influence on my own children. They said I was dishonoring my dead wife's memory by keeping her parents from their grandsons. The irony was staggering. They were defending people who had encouraged adultery while attacking me for protecting my traumatized children. The confrontation grew so heated that market security approached us. Rather than face questioning about why they were harassing a teenager, the men began backing away, but not before making it clear this wasn't over. "Your father-in-law is a pillar of our church community," Robert called out as they retreated. "He's a godly man who's been through enough. This family needs healing, and you're standing in the way." They followed us to our car like vultures, still calling out their judgments and demands. I managed to get my sons inside and drive away, but the damage was done. My youngest spent the drive home in angry silence, his birthday joy completely destroyed. My older son sat in furious silence, processing the fact that strangers felt entitled to attack our family in public. That night, after both boys had finally fallen asleep, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop screen. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was strategic. These men hadn't acted alone. Someone had given them information, painted a picture of our family that justified their intervention. Someone had weaponized a church congregation against us. I reached out to Michael, one of the few people from my ex-in-law's church who I still trusted. He'd always been kind to my sons, had never made us feel judged or unwelcome during the years we'd attended services there. If anyone would give me honest answers, it would be him. "I'm so sorry about what happened at the market," he said immediately. "I heard about it, and it was completely inappropriate." "How did you hear about it?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, "Your father-in-law has been very active on social media lately." What Michael told me next made everything click into place. My ex-father-in-law had posted a lengthy message in the church's private Facebook group, crafting a narrative so compelling and heart-wrenching that it could have been a Hallmark movie. According to his version of events, I was a bitter, vindictive man who was keeping him and his wife from their beloved grandsons out of spite. He claimed they were destitute, that I'd somehow stolen their inheritance, that my sons had turned cruel and wouldn't even speak to their grieving grandparents. But the masterpiece of manipulation was how he'd explained the existence of my wife's other children. He couldn't admit to the affair. This church community had zero tolerance for adultery. So he'd created an elaborate fiction. The other man had been our sperm donor, providing genetic material for us because I supposedly couldn't father more children. He claimed I'd rejected the babies when they turned out to be girls instead of boys, that I'd driven the surrogate mother to desperation, and that my selfishness had somehow led to both deaths. The story was so skillfully crafted that it explained every uncomfortable fact while painting his family as victims and mine as villains. The orphaned children became innocent babies rejected by a heartless stepfather. My son's trauma became bratty selfishness. My boundary setting became cruel vindictiveness. And my ex-in-law's financial demands became the desperate pleas of abandoned grandparents. The church community had rallied around them completely. The more extreme members were calling for intervention, for someone to save those poor grandsons from their father's influence. Hence the coordinated harassment at the market. I thanked Michael for his honesty and hung up the phone. Then I sat in my quiet kitchen and smiled for the first time in weeks. Because my ex-father-in-law had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate deception. He'd forgotten that I had evidence. Lots of evidence. See, when you're in the middle of divorce proceedings, you document everything. Every text message, every email, every piece of proof that supports your case. I had screenshots of my wife's affair, photos of her with her lover, messages between them discussing their children and their future together. I had conversations where she admitted everything to her parents, messages where they encouraged her to leave me for him. Most damning of all, I had recent communications from my ex-in-laws themselves. Messages where they called my sons horrible names for discovering their mother's affair. Texts where they blamed my children for their mother's death, claiming that if they hadn't told me about her cheating, I wouldn't have filed for divorce and somehow that had led to the accident. These messages had been sent just 2 days after my wife's funeral, while we were all still in shock and grief. The beauty of an unfinalized divorce is that there are no legal restrictions on sharing evidence. My wife had died before we could complete the proceedings, which meant all the documentation I'd gathered was still fair game, and I intended to use every piece of it. The next morning I took a personal day from work and drove to a high-end print shop. I wasn't going to do this halfway. I ordered premium paper, glossy photo prints, professional binding. If I was going to expose the truth, it was going to look as polished and credible as my ex-father-in-law's lies. I spent hours at home creating what I privately called hymnal packets. They were designed to look exactly like the small booklets the church distributed for special services. Familiar, innocuous, something people would pick up without thinking twice. The cover was simple and elegant with a title that read A Love Story in tasteful script. But when you opened the cover, the first thing you saw was a full-color photograph of my ex-wife and her lover in an intimate embrace. In our living room, the faces were clearly visible, unmistakably recognizable, and the man looked nothing like me. Different build, different hair color. Obviously a completely different person than the husband she came home to every night. Below the photo, in the same elegant script, I'd written their names and the words A True Love Story. The packets contained everything. Photos of them together in various locations, restaurants, hotels, even family events where she'd somehow managed to bring him while I was out of town. Screenshots of their text conversations, including discussions about their children, their plans for the future, and their excitement about building a life together. Messages where she told him she was planning to leave me. Conversations where they mocked my efforts to save our marriage. But the most devastating sections were the family communications. Screenshots of my ex-wife confessing the affair to her parents, and their responses encouraging her to pursue her happiness. Messages where my father-in-law called her lover a good man, and said he was excited to meet his grandchildren. Text conversations where my mother-in-law offered to help financially support the second family. The final section contained the recent harassment my sons had endured. Screenshots of messages where my ex-in-laws called my children bastards and blamed them for their mother's death. Texts where they demanded custody and threatened legal action if I didn't comply. The cruelest message of all was one sent during my wife's funeral, where my father-in-law told my oldest son that real grandsons would comfort their grandparents instead of being selfish brats. I printed 50 copies and bound them with care. They looked professional, authoritative, impossible to dismiss as forgeries or manipulation. Then I drove to the church. Sunday morning service started at 10. I arrived at 9:30 when the building was open, but most people were still getting ready at home. The church had a table near the entrance where they kept extra hymnals and programs for people who forgot theirs or were visiting. It was the perfect place to leave my packages. I arranged them neatly among the legitimate church materials and walked away. To anyone arriving early, they'd look like special programs for the service. People would grab them automatically, maybe even thank the ushers for providing such thorough materials. I didn't stay for the service. I drove home. I made breakfast for my sons and waited. The explosion started within hours. Michael called me first, his voice a mixture of shock and admiration. "Good God," he said. "What did you do?" The reaction had been immediate and devastating. People had opened the packets expecting hymns or prayers and instead found irrefutable proof that their beloved brother in Christ was a liar and his late daughter was an adulteress. The photos were impossible to deny, the messages too detailed to dismiss. Within minutes, the entire congregation knew the truth. But it wasn't just the affair that destroyed my ex-in-law's reputation. It was the cruelty toward my children. Conservative Christian communities might forgive many things, but harming children, especially grieving children, is unforgivable. The messages where they called my sons names, where they blamed 15 and 17-year-old boys for their mother's death, where they demanded custody while simultaneously psychologically abusing them, those messages turned even their strongest supporters against them. The Facebook backlash was swift and merciless. The same people who had supported my father-in-law's victim narrative were now calling his family liars and hypocrites. Comments flooded in expressing outrage that they'd manipulated the church community, that they'd sent men to harass a teenager, that they'd covered up adultery while pretending to be moral authorities. The language got so harsh that the pastor had to intervene to keep things relatively appropriate for a church forum. But even his attempts at peacemaking couldn't save my ex-in-law's reputation. Interestingly, some people tried to maintain that I was still partially at fault for filing for divorce in the first place. But even these critics acknowledged that my reaction was understandable given the circumstances, and that I would hopefully return to the light someday, unlike my adulterous wife and her paramour. They used other words too, words I won't repeat here, but the general sentiment was clear. My ex-wife and her lover were beyond redemption, while I was simply a man who had fallen, but could potentially be saved. I received 2 formal letters of apology from men who had participated in the market harassment. Both expressed shame at their behavior and acknowledged they'd been manipulated by false information. One even included an invitation to join their men's fellowship group for support and brotherhood. But the real victory was what happened to my ex-in-laws. They were publicly shamed and ultimately expelled from the church they'd attended for decades. The community that had once rallied around them now saw them as liars and child abusers. Their social circle, their support system, their entire identity as respected Christian elders, all of it was gone. My ex-father-in-law's response was predictably self-pitying. He posted on his personal Facebook page about feeling alienated and abandoned, complaining that no one cared about elderly people anymore. He wrote longingly about wishing his wonderful daughter was still alive, since she would have taken care of him and his wife. The irony was rich. He was mourning the financial support of a woman who'd been financially dependent on me for years. But perhaps the most satisfying part of this whole saga was what I discovered about my wife's will. She'd told me she'd named our sons as beneficiaries, that she wanted to make sure they were provided for if anything happened to her. I'd never demanded to be named myself. My own will lists my sons as beneficiaries, not her. Except she'd lied about that too. Her actual will named her parents as the primary beneficiaries, not our children. Just another deception in a life built on lies. Another way she'd planned to benefit her family at the expense of ours even after death. The truth had set us free in ways I hadn't expected. My sons were no longer being harassed by churchmen or guilt-tripped by their grandparents. The community pressure to reconcile with people who'd psychologically abused them was gone. We could focus on healing without constantly defending our boundaries. More importantly, my children learned a valuable lesson about the power of truth. They watched their father refuse to be silently victimized, refuse to let lies stand unchallenged, refuse to prioritize other people's comfort over our family's well-being. They learned that sometimes the most Christian thing you can do is expose hypocrisy and protect the innocent. Looking back, I don't regret my actions for a second. My ex-father-in-law weaponized his church community against grieving children. He spread elaborate lies to justify harassment and manipulation. He tried to use religious authority to force compliance with his demands. And when gentle boundary setting didn't work, when reasoning failed, when even basic human decency was ignored, sometimes the only option left is to let the truth burn down the house of lies. The best revenge isn't always getting even. Sometimes it's just refusing to let people lie about you unchallenged. Sometimes it's showing the world exactly who someone really is when they think no one is watching. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's watching hypocrites face the judgment of the very community they tried to turn against you. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it can be absolutely perfect. What's the most satisfying moment of truth you've ever witnessed? Have you ever seen someone's lies completely unravel in public? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love hearing about moments when the truth finally wins. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button because there are plenty more tales of perfectly served justice coming your way. Until next time, remember, the truth might hurt, but lies hurt so much more.